It was 10 years ago. At that time, many people's lives had changed. Having just become a wife, some were not immediately lucky enough to become a widow. Not the best of changes had happened, but the girls were thinking more positively, for if it hadn't been for the brother-in-law who had protected them all by undermining their dantian, many would have said goodbye to their lives. My brother-in-law sacrificed himself to save those women. They will remember it for a long time. The brother-in-law these women were talking about was a very young man who was our main character in the story, in the Indira sky, in the territory of the higher fencing current. That year, it happened that 9 senior disciples in the higher fencing current were married at the same time. But on the same day, the current was suddenly attacked by the blood demon progenitor. The head of the high swordsmanship current and 9 disciples were all killed, every last one of them. Of the entire direct hereditary lineage of the current, only 1 child survived. Moments before the final defeat, that young man's soul, accompanied by a sudden lightning strike, crossed over into this world. With a lightning strike that destroyed the progenitor of the blood demons. After crossing over to this world, the young man became the youngest disciple in the current supreme swordsman in the direct lineage, Ye Xuan. However, it was not without losses. Ye Xuan's spirit root was destroyed by a heavenly thunderstrike, but his sisters didn't even think of abandoning him. They even considered having the 6th sister create a pseudo-root for him. Generally speaking, Ye Xuan has lost his manhood, which every man should possess. But Big Sister didn't think it was a problem, and from now on, she was watching Ye Xuan. Thus our hero became a top-ranked keeper of 9 beautiful flowers. And also, to his surprise, unlocked the system. He had hope of budding the root. For 10 years, he was to check in, performing a series of movements as directed by the system. As a consequence, he embarked on a decade-long path of gestating the root of the spirit. With the help of the system and the support of his sisters, Ye Xuan was able to develop both spiritually and physically. All the residents knew his favorite place to improve. The children even called him Uncle Mentor. But they also all knew that Ye Xuan's spirit root had been completely destroyed. Because of this, the adults despised him, because Ye Xuan was unworthy of being called a mentor in their opinion. As he spent his days beneath the skirts of the 9 sisters, today's mark was counted, marking for 10 years, the host had managed to successfully activate the divine level selection system. Ye Xuan was still able to hold out, which impressed him himself. Now it would be a sin not to rain down a flood of gold fingers and material wealth on this patient. But he was not happy for long, for he had a new task. Nangong Zhao was approaching, and if Ye Xuan were to enclose her in a tight embrace, his reward would be 1 spirit root. But if nothing is done, the system will be forever blocked. The host will remain a worthless mediocrity. Nangong Zhao was the current head of the supreme fencing current, and it was obvious that she was happy to see her brother-in-law. Senior sister was definitely beautiful. After all, the system really did know its business and Ye Xuan couldn't give up on it. Well, if that's the case, sister shouldn't be angry. It is better to be an animal with a root than to be a scum worse than an animal. And even without a root, Ye Xuan decided to use his best acting knowledge and started to pretend to be a sufferer, saying that he had realized everything and didn't need to be protected from now on. But many people were right. He was just a rootless scum who had become a burden to his sisters. Such words angered his sister. She didn't understand why he was saying that. All these years his sisters had raised him to be a man. So why was he now begging for his dignity and hurting himself? None of those cretins even knew why it was like this. Wealth and honor were achieved in risk. If Ye Xuan wanted the elder to hug him on his own initiative, he had to go wah-wah. Nangong Zhao had always been kind to him, but he decided to repay such kindness in the next life. But just as our hero believed, Nangong jumped off the cliff after him, not wanting to leave him behind and hoping to save him. They were very close to each other, which wasn't even decent. Perhaps this was the best jump of Ye Xuan's life, and it wouldn't happen again. It's done. Nangong Zhao still hugged Ye Xuan on her own initiative, and she also forbade him from dying. After all, they were supposed to take care of each other. Maybe at this moment our hero was ashamed, but on the other hand, he experienced happiness from the accomplished task, from this embrace, and from something else. The system rewarded him with a spirit root. This root could evolve and increase in rank depending on how long he embraced Nangong Zhao. But there was a problem. This spirit root was defective, and at what point was it even a spirit root? In any case, Ye Xuan was not going to miss the moment to cuddle with Nangong for a longer time, and continued to spread his snot and complain about life. Their fall did not go unnoticed, and while still aloft, those watching immediately recognized the head and the scum. To think they were hugging. What nonsense. How could something shameful happen in a majestic stream with thousands of years of heritage? Of course, the Outer Circle disciples reacted violently to such a thing. After all, they had always kept their distance with their sisters, and Xuan was shamelessly hugging them. Master had been trying to gain favor from Nangongzhao for a long time, but she still ignored him. And such a prank was a public insult to him. Yuan-ji was an elder of the Outer Circle, and having feelings for Nangong, and after catching her in an embrace with Ye Xuan, he was ready to incinerate the entire world and finish the two of them off. Suddenly, during her fall, Nangong felt Ye Xuan's dantian literally burning her, which seemed unbearable. The system was already congratulating Ye Xuan for completing the divine-level task. The reward was the evolution of a defective root into a legendary heavenly Tao ultimate fortitude and ultimate Yang spirit root. Becoming a dark Yang dragon root possessor, Ye Xuan gained the ability to absorb natural spiritualized qi. He himself could not believe that after so many years, it had still happened and he had managed to activate the heavenly Tao spirit root. Sis was finding it even harder and harder to restrain herself. She felt hot while she asked her brother-in-law not to make any strange movements. Ye Xuan didn't fully understand what was wrong and asked his sister to pull herself together, but she couldn't take it anymore. She could feel Ye Xuan's changes with all her gut, and because of this, her passion only grew hotter. No longer had the ease that would allow them to float in the air. Under Nangong's pressure, they collapsed together to the ground where they lay too close. Nangongzhao couldn't hold back any longer, nor did she want to. Everything she had inside her came out. It was about to happen, and she had already made a breakthrough. It was as if that hot bird that he had been holding back for so long had burst out of her body. The power of such an aura was simply astonishing that other disciples could sense. The Nine Heavens Phoenix spiritual root immediately made it clear that this was the head of the Nangongzhao current. Of course, Yuan-ji wasn't happy about this news. And in fact, he didn't understand how it was possible for her to make a breakthrough after reaching the peak of her original spirit root. The strength of her spirit root was originally beyond reason, and now she had once again made a breakthrough. From now on, no one from the Outer Circle was her opponent. Yuan-ji didn't want to leave things like this, and thought about what he could do. Nangong was just a girl. And since he couldn't defeat her in a fight, he thought of just undermining her reputation. Then he also wanted to see how she would manage to hold her position. This is what the spirit root of the great heavenly Tao looked like. It could even compete with Ye Xuan's sword. Moreover, he managed to help his big sister make a breakthrough in one fell swoop. It was only a pity that after that, she immediately had to retreat into a bolt to stabilize her strength. If not for that, Xuan wouldn't have let her out of his embrace. What would happen if the other sisters found out about his miraculous action? Yixin was just happy that he had finally become a man again. But even so, someone had bothered to call him ignorant. Who was it? A girl showed up in response, and she was clearly annoyed that the host turned out to be a nasty pervert. The girl's name was Lin Shen. She was the administrator of the divine level selection system. Ye Xuan could call her Lin Air. In addition, our hero had activated the system, but now he had to decide, did he intend to make an official binding? The divine level selection system originated during the time of primordial chaos. By now, it had been adopted for endless years. No one knows its history. To date, it has managed to change countless hosts. Thanks to its support, some people created entire countries and became immortal emperors. Others reached enlightenment and became golden immortals of the celestial sphere. There were also those who turned into invincible gods of war, sowing death all over the world. It can be said that each of them achieved absolute glory and power, but in the end, they all made the wrong choice, after which their bodies died and their souls were dispersed. Each time, the system will provide the user with two alternatives: a safe choice that will save their skin, and a high-risk but also high-reward choice. As the publication progresses, so will the complexity of the assignments. The same goes for the clues and tricks contained in the quests. The essence of choosing a divine level is in the boundary between life and death. Every thought, every step can lead the user to the heavenly halls or to the depths of the underworld. Once a selection is made, it must be implemented. Otherwise, the user would be reduced to ashes. But will a simpleton like Ye Xuan have the courage to commit to the system? It all sounded dangerous enough. Fight or die. And yet it was just the right thing to do. With his second life, Ye Xuan had had enough of the scornful glances. What good is a life like this if you're nothing? Ye Xuan believed that he would definitely become stronger and would not regret his choice, no matter what happened to him. Liner could only hope that Xuan would live longer. Lastly, the administrator advised, the Almighty of all three realms were looking for Linger and the system. Therefore, Xuan must keep everything secret and not let anyone discover their existence, or else he would dig his own grave. The system binding was complete, which meant Yeshuan's path as a cultivator was now paved. But immediately a message appeared. It turns out that the spirit root of the heavenly Tao was formed from the dragon soul progenitor of deep antiquity, an essence of ultimate purity and ultimate yang. The rate of refinement it provided was far beyond that of ordinary spirit roots. To advance in rank, the dragon root of arcane yang required joint tempering with the spirit root of arcane yin. Otherwise, there was a risk of body rupture. This did not at all upset our hero, for he knew perfectly well that all his 9 sisters possessed this attribute. That meant 10 years of struggle and effort. And finally, Ye Xuan had entered the boundless path of becoming an immortal. But first, he wanted to check how much his physical performance had developed. In one leap he managed to reach 3 meters, and he felt like he was flying. That's how it felt to possess spiritual power. A truly magnificent feeling. All this time, Ye Xuan could not contain his emotions, and was rejoicing and laughing, of course, and his laughter could be heard. The second sis, Huang Yuezhong, would really like to know what the reason for such joy was. Huang Yuezhong was the second oldest elder of the supreme fencing current, she immediately noticed, as if her brother-in-law had changed a bit. Nangong Zhao was forced to go into recluse, so she instructed Huang Yuezhong to make sure Ye Xuan received the spirit stones and elixirs. Just today, the current was conducting the issuance of refinement resources, and the news spread very quickly, especially among the disciples. All the talk was about Nangong, the universally recognized goddess. How many omnipotent ones had cherished the dream of becoming her Taoist partner. But how could she make a breakthrough with this Ye Xuan? In what kind of life had this scum gathered so much luck? But all talk immediately stopped as soon as they spotted Huang Yuezhong and Ye Xuan. Of course, when Ye Xuan saw the second elder in Ye Xuan's company, he didn't need to stand in line to obtain spiritual stones. Of course, it wasn't without tweaks. The disciples didn't understand why a scum without a spirit root needed the stones and elixirs needed for tempering. Wasn't it a waste of the current's resources? That brat, Yu Weiba, often bullied our hero. In the world of cultivators, strength played a major role. In the past, Xuan's physical stats were that of a mere mortal, and the benefits of being a disciple of the inner circle were of no use to him. Xuan's potential was not even comparable to newcomers, and Yue Ba tried not to let that be forgotten. Huang Yuezhong didn't let this pass her ears and showed Yue Ba's seat. He had to show respect to Xuan since he was the only disciple of the supreme fencing current in the direct lineage, and from a position of seniority, he was the mentor uncle to Yue. So how was he able to show disrespect to his elders? This rebel was immediately escorted to the elder and the law enforcement officer. But he continued to throw nasty words at Ye Xuan. And if Ye Xuan was truly a man, then he should have been able to face off with Yue one-on-one. And indeed, such a provocation worked very well. Ye Xuan was ready to pounce on Yue Ba like a beast. And that's where his next choice would begin. He could be a man, and go up against Yue Ba, and obtain a rare immortal rank artifact. He could continue to be a turtle with his head pulled into his shell. But then, this turtle shell would be impossible to remove. He had 2 more quests. He could see Huang Yuezhong's underwear, for which he would get 1 strength pill, or he could do nothing and his root size would decrease. The system was already overstepping its bounds, because it was setting very harsh conditions. And what the heck was that with the second assignment? But it seems like there was a hidden relationship between these 4 tasks. He could first see Huang's underwear, for which he would receive a pill, and then oppose Yue Ba, receiving an immortal rank artifact. It was so vulgar that Xuan approved. He immediately sprang into action, asking his sister not to get involved in this conflict, and wished to solve his problems himself. Xuan proposed such rules. Each of them will hide a spirit stone in the current territory. If Ye Xuan is the first to find Yue's stone, the latter will accept any punishment. But if the first to find the stone was Yue Ba, our hero was willing to leave the current and his foot would never set foot in the Indira sky again. Which seemed too big a bet for Huang Yuezhong. Yue only laughed in response, and of course accepted these conditions as he was fully confident of his victory. Everyone was curious as to how this brat would get out of this situation. Huang Yuezhong herself didn't understand why he had made such a bet, but Ye Xuan was still confident because he had a plan. But for this plan, he will just need Huang Yuezhong's help. The second task was completed, and Ye Xuan was rewarded with his strength pill. Now there was a question for Yue. Did he have his stone covered and ready to begin? So far, everything was going according to plan. Surprisingly, Huang Yuzhong was light on her feet to help her brother-in-law. But as for Yue Ba, he was confused because he had absolutely no sense of where Ye Xuan could hide his stone. Because of this, he was starting to feel nervous and lost. However, his inability to sense the spirit stone spoke volumes about his mediocrity. So there was no need to be angry if Ye Xuan beat him to it. Yue couldn't even respond to such teasing. He kept trying to feel the stone, but all attempts were even. Ye Xuan was curious. What normal man would think of hiding it in his underwear with the chickens? But now we understand why that boy has such a nasty temper, and the victory was for our hero. It's unequivocal. Yue couldn't hold back anymore. He was very angry. After all, he completely didn't understand how his stone was found, and how Ye Xuan had hidden the stone so that it couldn't be found or felt. In the end, he said what he thought. Because he thought Ye Xuan was cheating because he couldn't perceive the energy of the spirit stones. The second elder must have helped him. Because he was always fawning over her, and not only her. Everyone had seen him hugging her. This was already an insult to not only Ye Xuan, but also Huang Yuezhong. Of course she couldn't let it pass. How could this little brat disrespect the head and spread false rumors about her? But this guy was restless, and asked not to vindicate Ye Xuan. Moreover, everyone had recently seen the other head amused in the sky with Ye Xuan in his arms. Such antics would ruin the reputation of the current overnight. The crowd supported Yue Ba's indignation. Everyone was displeased with such shenanigans, and how could it go unheeded? Many were glad that the outer circle had the support of Elder Yuan. Other disciples continued to insist that Uncle Preceptor was not such a person as they were currently expressing about him. But still, some had actually seen him hugging Nangongjao. Ye Shen, once everyone quieted down, didn't look too confused, but more disappointed Yi Xuan wasn't going to take any active actions for now. Yue Ba continued to depress the situation, and drew attention to the fact that Ye Xuan had the patronage of girls, found luxury, and had access to rare resources. This was unfair. Hence, he proposed to expel him from the Supreme Swordsmanship current. That's the kind of justice you can only wipe your ass with. That asshole didn't know who he was messing with, and he thought he was a lot of things. He couldn't even be considered half a man, and yet he pretended to be a champion of justice. We should take into account that there has always been a serious split between the inner and outer circles of the higher fencing movement. And so it came to the point that Yue Ba, an ordinary disciple, dared to publicly defame the name of the head. Such a thing had to be crossed to the roots, and that person had to die. At the moment of the massacre, the disciples split into two camps. Some wished for Ye Xuan to win, and some wished for Yue Ba to win. And it was at this point that our hero decided to use the Pill of Strength, which was not long in coming. Yi Xuan possessed the Buddha Divine Palm technique, but now, thanks to the pill, it was an enhanced version. A single blow was enough for the opponent to lie unconscious and the victor to blow the dust from his hands. Yue really wasn't breathing. He had large bruises on his face, and blood was flowing from his mouth. But those were the rules. The law of the flow of higher swordsmanship stated that disrespecting the head was punishable by death. As for today's incident, Ye Xuan explained that he had fallen off the cliff due to his carelessness, and the chapter had saved his life. But it seems that many people here had a different impression. But if anyone else allows something like that from a statement, the outcome will be the same as with Yue Ba. Many of the students rubbed the backs of their heads awkwardly, for at last they had been cleared of their doubts. They were convinced that the heads had high moral principles, and no one would do anything that would damage the reputation of the movement. At this moment, Ye Xuan realized that Yue Ba wouldn't have dared to be so crazy if he didn't have a patron behind him whose goal was to finally split the current of supreme swordsmanship. Xuan felt obligated to find a way to stop this. Huang Yuezhong, at the end of this whole incident, finally recognized that Ye Xuan had indeed matured, and his plan was excellent. Our hero couldn't think of anything but recent events, specifically the recent sight of Huang Yuezhong, and her purple linen will forever be in his fretful heart. Ye Xuan had done his task well, and in view of over-accomplishing the task, he was unlocked an additional reward, an ancient immortal rank item for body hardening, the Emperor Dragon Bone. Ye Shen froze and thought for a moment, for he didn't know what an imperial dragon skull was at all. Huang Yuezhong became worried, but the young man soon came to his senses, and referred his brooding to the fact that he was thinking of what he could thank Huang Yuezhong with. He thought a great help would be to help get the spirit stone out of there. But the chapter didn't need that kind of help. This rascal was being rude at all. If Ye Xuan really wanted to thank Huang Yuezhong, he should have listened to her. Back then, 10 years ago, during the attack of the blood demon progenitor, Father Mentor and the brothers had sacrificed their lives. In order to protect the flow of supreme swordsmanship, they eliminated their cultivation to launch the Great Hushin formation. However, it was under the onslaught of a powerful force, and now there were suspicions that the blood demon progenitor had returned and intended to take revenge. It was possible that his power had now reached peak deification, a whole stage greater than Nangong Zhao. There was a chance that the current of supreme swordsmanship was once again waiting for a fierce battle. And since Ye Zhuan was now able to improve, there was no time to waste. Huang was determined to open the Zhongnan illusory realm ahead of schedule for the trials. They didn't talk about anything serious anymore. Ye Xuan understood Huang Yuezhong's worries perfectly. Hence, he tried to calm her down with his hug. Besides, 10 years ago, Ye Xuan had already managed to severely wound him. And if that old bastard dared to show up again, Zhuan would arrange for him to meet a god. One day, he would be able to protect all the sisters. Huang Yuezhong was happy. For now, she could rely on this young man. For he was a grown man who was willing to stand up for his relatives. But they couldn't hug for long. They were caught off guard. UNG wanted to discuss some business with the second elder. The guys immediately moved away from each other so as not to add fuel to the fire. No one had any idea what this old man wanted. Maybe he decided to go for conflict after learning about what happened to his ward. But no, it was something else. Yuan blamed himself for not raising his disciple well. His connivance had turned his disciple into a vicious brat, and he had no qualms about the punishment that the second elder had given him. Yuan was looking for a meeting with Huang Yuezhong to consult about an important matter. It was very surprising that this old schemer would just accept that his disciple had been killed. After all, he had always been feuding with the inner circle, and such loyalty was not his style. He wanted to talk about the Five Perfections Convention, which was dedicated to the sword art debate. He wanted to talk about the Five Perfections Convention, which was a debate on the sword arts, so he wanted to give his disciples a chance to have some practical experience. Huang Yuezhong, of course, shared his thoughts, and was thinking about it herself. Therefore, Yuan Zi, in this matter, completely relied on the elder. This old man knew that Ye Xuan had recovered the spirit root, therefore he had a plan. Since he had killed his disciple and stood in his way of becoming head, he decided to make sure that Xuan would never return from the illusory Zhongnan realm. So far, this old man hadn't done anything weird, so our hero only had to wait until he gave himself away. In the meantime, Ye Xuan would have to take care of some urgent matters. Linger immediately appeared at his call. Ye Xuan certainly had questions about this Emperor Dragon Skull, something he knew nothing at all about. Linger, of course, knew how to choose her own seat, and besides, there was nothing she could tell either. If the system didn't give a description, she had no right to talk about it. She could only say that this item was the treasure of a certain immortal. Whether to absorb it or not was solely Ye Xuan's decision. Then our hero remembered that his 8th sister was from the Qingqiu Immortal Fox clan. He could just ask her to take a look at him and have her give advice. So that same evening he appeared at her place. Her whole yard smelled of alcohol, and there were jugs of it everywhere. It was frightening to think how much she had drunk, and she was hiding in a tree and was surprised by Ye Xuan's arrival. Our hero got a nosebleed when he saw such a sight, and for free. But he tried not to give himself away, only worried about his sister. Because drinking so much alcohol was bad for his health, and what for? She drank because of Ye Xuan. She was glad that his spirit root had been restored, which meant that she was saved. What was she talking about? And she was saying it as if his root had some other special properties besides hardening. She was a peerless lord of the Qingqiu clan. However, she had been a carrier of the rare obsession toxin since birth. She could only neutralize it through pair cultivation with an equal stage partner. Therefore, she married the 8th brother of mentor Jing Lei, who died in battle. Sis thought that she had no hope left. But Ye Xuan was born almost at the same time as Jing Lei. Ye Xuan was the reason why the girl didn't leave the course of supreme swordsmanship after his death. And now that Ye Xuan had regained possession of the spirit root, Sis would count on him in the future. If within 10 years, Ye Xuan could equal 8th sister in strength, then similarly, she would be able to neutralize the toxin. And now she had reached the original spirit level. She had deliberately restrained her growth, so she was only at the middle stage now. She of course realized that she had asked for the impossible, to go from body hardening to primordial spirit in 10 years, let alone Indira heaven. Even in this world of immortals, no one could do such a thing. However, she had no one else to hope for. The obsession toxin had been making itself known to her lately, causing her unbearable agony every time. Ye Xuan supported her and promised her that he would be able to reach the original spirit and then rid her of the toxin. Of course she would wait, but she also wanted to evaluate her goods and see his new spirit root soon, and when she saw it, it fulfilled all her expectations. Besides, Ye Xuan's spirit root belonged to the roots of the heavenly Tao of ultimate purity and ultimate yang. Yishan could barely contain himself, while his little sister was calm, and finally decided that she would wait for this hour. When all was settled, the alcohol had taken its toll, and she fell asleep. And at a bad time. After all, Yizhuan still hadn't asked about the Imperial Dragon Bones. Asleep, she asked to bring her some snacks to drink, but it was unlikely that she would give the information Ye Xuan needed. Apparently it was only now that she decided to remember the appetizers, and she'd been drinking on an empty stomach the whole time. Still, Sis said that the Emperor Dragon Bones was a treasure of the immortal world, and by absorbing it, one could remake the innate potential. This interested him, because it gave him so many new possibilities. But also, Sis said that it couldn't be rashly consumed, or else the meridians would be completely destroyed. But did he hear that? The Zhongnan realm was one of the sacred places of the supreme swordsmanship current and the three great schools. Compared to the outside world, time flowed 4 times slower in the illusory realm, making it a good place to improve. In order to open the illusory realm, the current spent several million spiritual stones and a lot of money to allow disciples to enter it. UNG planned to target the heavenly stage. He was the representative of all the outer circle disciples. He was Elder Ji's nephew, possessing 2 spirit roots from birth and having access to spiritual treasures since he was young. In just 5 years, he had managed to reach the final stage of the Qi tempering stage. There were only 4 levels in the illusory realm: heavenly, earthly, dark, and yellow, among which heavenly was the most difficult. But given Yuanzi's status, he was certain that only heaven stage technicians were worthy of him. If anyone ventured to compete with him, let them not blame his cruelty. Apparently all these words were addressed to the inner circle disciples, but they didn't think to reply anything. The disciples knew that his stage was great, plus he was patronized by UNG and there was nothing they could do. But someone had a question. Was the first elder of the outer district really a serious person? Of course, Ji reacted to such a barb toward his uncle, and he saw the offender right above him, which was in Ye Xuan's face, and allowed himself to sarcastic remarks in response. A serious fight is about to break out, because a man with an even bigger roof than UNG's has come here. Who does this bastard think he is when he threatened the others? They were all of the same current, so why was he threatening the inner circle? But when he also began to threaten Ye Xuan, he did not restrain himself any longer and hit him harder. All the disciples were shocked by this prank, while Ye Xuan didn't care at all what kind of trouble he was getting into and what kind of enemies he was making. Still, he wondered what consequences awaited him that UNG had cried out so much about. But it didn't follow. Ye Xuan explained that Ji should be less likely to bring his worthless uncle into the mix, after all. The flow of higher fencing had its own laws, and if he ever saw someone bullying students again, Uncle Mentor wouldn't stand by. Just recently, Ye Xuan had killed UNG's disciple, but the latter didn't say anything back. After such a scene, all the students exclaimed happily, and they liked their uncle's mentor even more, because really who did that type think he was? He was in the current, not at home, to lash out at the others like that. The time had come. There was no prohibition against fighting in these trials, but the disciples had to know the measure. If they killed a comrade, they would be expelled from the current. If they encountered danger, they would always have the option to return back by cracking the Jade Teleportation Scroll. Every technique within the illusory realm had a guardian. Apprentices could only obtain the technique by defeating it. It was necessary to act according to one's capabilities, or else there was a chance of getting killed. The new world was now open, and disciples could enter it to begin their cultivation, and the sisters had prepared some elixirs and spirit stones for Ye Xuan. They were in the ring. Huang lastly asked him to be careful with UNG. After all, he had excellent talent and had already reached the final stage of Qi tempering. Yishen was happy, for all this said was that the sisters loved him very much. Entering the illusory world, Ye Xuan cast aside any doubts and insecurities. After all, there was a completely different space waiting for him here. Despite the time he had spent in this world, Ye Xuan was here for the first time. But someone could not calm down after what happened and searched for some time for our hero. Did you decide to give an honorable welcome to your uncle's mentor and have already learned your manners? But that was not the case. He wasn't considered an uncle mentor, but some scum who sat on women's necks. The disciples wanted to avenge Yu Weiba's death and kill Ye Xuan. Just Ye Xuan walked in here, so he was immediately surrounded on all sides. He was alone and only at the body tempering stage against a bunch at the QE tempering stage. It was a dangerous situation, but to face the enemy he needed a strategy, and above all, one could not lose in determination. And he wasn't losing here. He was determined to show as much confidence as possible, so they would realize who they were messing with, and what consequences they would have to suffer. Ji decided to take out a jade sound recording scroll, and ordered him to speak the truth to his questions. Ji was interested in how Ye Xuan revived the spirit root, and whether he had engaged in any obscenities with Nangong Zhao. This was the plan of the enemies. Nangong, being a head with tremendous strength, was still a girl, and gossip would cause her serious damage. Undoubtedly, if her reputation suffered, the position of the head would also become unstable. There was no doubt now that this was all Yuanzi's plan. The system immediately gave out a random assignment. He could kneel down and surrender, putting up a rag and giving up karma, or he could teach these ignoramuses some manners, finish them all off, for which he would receive the original mirror of the 8 trigrams. The selection wasn't great, but it would be nice to get a mirror that was a medium-quality jade-level treasure. Half of the mirror had been lost, and in the case of finding the other half, its power would increase greatly. Well, if this Neanderthal wanted to listen to gossip, then who was Ye Xuan to not tell them? Thinking that Ye Xuan had actually realized his place, Yuanji decided to be more benevolent, and warned that if he liked what he heard, he would not cut our hero's corpse apart. But Ye Xuan had no intention of making any concessions, for he spat at this fool and those behind him. He wanted to hear the savory details about Ye Xuan by his sisters, so let him heed them now. Finally, Yuanji's underlings realized that they had to do something, and instead of standing still, they immediately rushed towards Ye Xuan. And he in turn was not confused and sent the source of all problems right into their hands, not intending to kill him yet. The next time they meet, they'll each get their asses kicked. Yuanji couldn't even speak. He had been slapped so soundly by Zhuan, and through the pain, he ordered the other disciples to kill him. Ye Xuan had a cheater's natural talent, but even with this kind of crowd, he wouldn't be able to handle it right now. So he thought about looking for cover. There were quite a few refinement techniques hidden within this illusory realm. Each technique existed in a separate reserved realm, and only one person could enter it to pass the test. Actually, Ye Xuan had found what he was looking for, but they weren't just going to let him go. Yuanji wasn't happy that he was attacked sneakily. Therefore, wanting Ye Xuan to die, he sent a sword into his back while he was reaching his hiding place. And unfortunately, he didn't manage to avoid that strike. The sword aimed by Yuanji stabbed straight into his back, but his strength still hadn't left him. And he didn't miss the chance to jump into the portal. His transfer was successful, and the portal closed, no one else could get in. But our enemy lost his fish sword that was stuck in Ye Xuan's body, and it was not an ordinary sword, but a really great treasure. However, our hero left a clue behind, a teleportation scroll. Without the teleportation scroll, Ye Xuan could not get out of here, so the students decided to wait here until Xuan appeared. In the meantime, Ye Xuan had already crossed over to the protected sphere. Behind him, he left drops of blood on the dry sand. Ye Xuan was injured, but not in any way depressed in spirit, and Yuanji would still regret the reality of not being able to kill him. The desert seemed empty, but suddenly a huge shadow formed over the young man's body. Behind could be seen the huge body of a royal dragon elephant. Apparently, it was the guardian of this sphere, but he didn't look friendly in any way. Ye Xuan looked like a small ant against him, trying to escape somehow. But it was only even, because his skin was too thick for the fish sword. Immediately, the system appeared, reproaching Xuan for being lucky fools. But the place our hero had chosen to hide turned out to be a low-discharge celestial stage technique reserve realm. And to face such a powerful guardian, Ye Xuan was at the yellow level, the lowest level possible, and how a heaven stage technique could be here was unknown. Still, it was necessary to decide how to get rid of this elephant. The dragon elephant is an extremely aggressive sacred guardian beast with strength equal to peak chi tempering. And before meeting it, one must prepare to defeat it. For example, to reach the peak tempering level of this technique, then the strength will be equal to that of the elephant. Alas, the system could not provide a direct answer on how to defeat him. Only basic information. Still, if Xuan reached the strength of a sacred beast guardian, Yuanji wouldn't be any problem. Xuan in turn was sure that this fool was sitting and waiting for him to come out of the portal. And time here glass was 10 times slower than outside. which meant there was much more time to temper. And once Xuan left this place, he would be able to deal with this gang of kids. But still, it was necessary to deal with the problems as they came and first defeat the royal dragon elephant. And the best way to do that was to raise the limits. So he decided it was time to swallow the Emperor Dragon Bone. The absorption wasn't easy, but Xuan tried his best to hold on through to the end. His bones and muscles felt like they were being torn apart. The pain was unbearable, and it was very difficult to bear it calmly. So Xuan screamed. And when this pain became habitual, his body began to beat convulsively, and it was harder to sit still. Linner was worried that he couldn't withstand the meridian and bone marrow flushing, which meant she needed to find a new host. After all, Xuan was already unfit for this role by all appearances. But he had only revived the spirit root and knew very well that the sisters needed him. He decided not to give up. The willpower in him was much stronger than his intolerable pain, and the motivation to get stronger was even greater. He remembered why he was doing it. Ling Er was fortunately mistaken, for Ye Xuan still endured the process, which was not a bad thing. Who knows, perhaps in time, he might be able to achieve what his predecessors had not been able to. Ye Xuan himself was happy that this process had finally come to an end, and he had successfully undergone meridian flushing. Apparently, this time he had absorbed the bone of the dragon's right paw. It was curious what part he would be able to obtain next time. Xuan was looking forward to the chance to find out. Right now, he was at the body hardening stage. His level of tempering was not high, but the degree of his physical strength was already far beyond ordinary cultivators at the QE tempering stage. It was quite possible that in its current state, it would be able to resist a royal dragon elephant. Besides, now was the perfect moment for a surprise attack since they were all asleep. For a long time, he didn't think how he should attack and just rushed into the attack, and there he decided to act according to the situation, relying solely on his strength, but not on tactics. But to pass on, he couldn't even jump off. Something stopped him. On his foot, he noticed a little girl clinging tightly to his boot with her hands. He was surprised. He didn't expect anyone else to be here besides the guardian beasts. And where did she come from? The girl perceived Ye Xuan as a fragrant treasure, and calling herself in the third person as Zhao Zhao, she wanted to eat this immortal treasure. But Ye Xuan urged her to open her eyes. After all, he was a man, not an immortal treasure. Only she said otherwise. Zhao Zhao had seen everything, and Ye Xuan apparently had an immortal treasure. She became completely aggressive and covered Ye Xuan's entire view with her body. Thus she tried to devour our hero's face, and he couldn't do anything else. But apparently they'll have to deal with that later, as their noise attracted the attention of the elephants, who were very displeased. And Linner was already jokingly saying that Xuan was really lucky, because he had managed to find an elf of the illusionary realm, although this little girl looked more like a voracious pig or a hungry spirit. Finally finding a small gap in the rocks, Ye Xuan snuck into it, because the elephants would not be able to get through. It turns out that our hero had the good fortune to attract an elf originated by the illusory Zhongnan kingdom and bound to it by blood. For 10,000 years, she turned out to be the only one of her kind. However, her life would soon run out. Her appearance, intelligence, and strength had already degraded to that of a child. Apparently, she had noticed Ye Xuan devouring an imperial dragon bone and thought that he had an immortal treasure. But in reality, she was looking for the fruit of regeneration. By eating it, she would be able to immediately regenerate to the youth phase. This kind of fruit could be found in the system's store assortment. But Ye Xuan had no contribution points. Further, he must provide the system with human lives, or other things that had value, and in return, he would receive contribution points that he could exchange for items. But to get 30 points, it was likely that destroying Yuanji and his gang wouldn't be enough. They were really hard to earn, and it was annoying. But was it even worth the effort just for the sake of this glutton? What could she possibly give our hero that would be useful? And just looking at those bottomless girlish eyes, her trembling voice, one could still make a decision. Ye Xuan had a thing for female beauty, and especially for the sake of such a cute girl, he didn't mind pushing himself and collecting those 30 points. He treated her as if she were his daughter or little sister, sweetly asking her to wait for him here while he killed the elephant. Although Zhao Zhao was already a child, but she was not stupid, and as much as she could tell Ye Xuan what to do. What she meant to say was that the royal dragon elephant's weak point was precisely in the belly area. As soon as he realized this, he immediately rushed into battle, under Zhao Zhao's words of encouragement. He looked as if he believed in himself and his strength, and now had no doubts about his victory, no matter how much bigger the elephant looked. But from the outside, One movement of the elephant's foot could easily destroy our hero like a mosquito. Ye Xuan was not afraid of this, but threw himself under his feet. He never thought that the exercises that the system had forced him to do in the past would be useful to him in a situation like this. Once he had prepared the ground for the attack, there was no more room for doubt. Still, the fish sword was still a gift to Ye Xuan, for without it, it would have been more difficult to deal with. The elephant was dead. A Ye Xuan had managed to acquire a low-grade heavenly rank refinement technique, the Royal Dragon Elephant technique. This technique belonged to the body-hardening stage refinement techniques. When mastered to the maximum, it bestowed the divine power of the dragon elephant. Our hero was definitely lucky, although it didn't seem so at first. And now, just holding this scroll in his hands, he could feel a tremendous energy. Without even knowing how much it could increase his power, Zhaozha immediately found herself in Ye Xuan's arms, happy with her new friend's victory. She still needed to be patient for a while, and then Ye Xuan could collect enough points and exchange them for an immortal treasure. In turn, Ye Xuan himself was looking forward to meeting Yuan Ji to show him who the boss was. 3 days had already passed, and these scum were still waiting for Ye Xuan no matter what. The allies were already worried, but Yuan Ji was confident and smilingly anticipated the upcoming encounter. But on the other hand, the disciples were worried for a reason, because if they continued to loiter, it might affect the extraction of techniques. Yichi was also starting to realize this. He still wanted to come back stronger. But he also didn't want to lose Ye Xuan after all. This was also his main objective. Therefore, he proposed the following. Instead of wasting no time, Xi decided to go to extract the techniques first, while the disciples were to wait for Ye Xuan. And when they came out of here, Xi promised that he would explain the whole situation to his uncle, and ask for one high-grade dark stage technique as compensation for each of the disciples. And surprisingly, no one was even against it. On the contrary, they liked the idea very much. Given their strength, they were sure they couldn't have gotten something better. Yuan Ji left the other disciples behind and went to look for techniques for himself, and the disciples in turn looked motivated, hoping to finish off Ye Xuan. Our hero returned not by himself, but with his new ward, and his return was triumphant. After all, he hadn't even gotten out of the portal before he immediately killed several students. For the 2 QE hardening cultivators of the initial stage, Ye Xuan only received 4 contribution points. After the recent reinforcement, now this bunch of types with the hardened QE of the initial stage were no match for him at all. In this world, trials were divided into 4 levels, and Ye Xuan dared to hide in the dark level, which required one to possess at least the final stage of key tempering. Unfortunately, but many students lacked the temperament to still pass to the dark level. But that didn't stop the other disciples from chasing after Ye Xuan, who was apparently trying to lead them into a trap. He tried to run away from the attacks, but he didn't attack himself as there wasn't the right time yet. But the thing was, it wasn't Ye Xuan at all. It was just a copy of him that Zhao Zhao had successfully made. There was no point in her staying here any longer. She distracted some of the students and decided to head back. And the disciples only realized that they had been fooled. Because how could Ye Xuan even have the strength to go to the dark level? And yet, they decided to return, because it was possible that their brothers were now in danger. Ye Xuan meanwhile was gaining points for himself, taking 2 points from each corpse. It was brutal, but it seemed to bring him some pleasure. He managed to collect 16 points in total, which was more than half. And the idea of dividing the students and outbidding them individually still paid off. The cultivators' bodies were saturated with spiritual energy. By absorbing them, the system received spiritual energy, which played a supporting role to strengthen the system. This method was very effective. That was why they decided to introduce such rules, so that the system could absorb them. Quite quickly, one could notice how the other students had already returned. Ye Xuan had yet to notice Ye Xuan, but they had noticed that absolutely all of their brothers were missing. Our hero decided to lurk in a tree where he couldn't be seen. And when the time came, he attacked these students who were just guarding him. Uncle Mentor decided to simplify their search in this way. There was no longer any ease or excitement in their eyes, only fear. Realizing that Ye Xuan had killed all of their disciples, they did not want that fate for themselves. But alas, their deaths were inevitable, no matter how hard they tried to resist. They wanted to easily obtain techniques, but ended up paying with their lives and the fact that they decided to cooperate with Yuan Ji. Killing students was forbidden in this world, and it seemed as if our hero was not afraid of being kicked out of the current for it. But apparently, he had his own plans, and he knew how to clean up the mess. When everyone had been killed, Ye Xuan still managed to gain the required number of points and made the exchange for the recovery fruit. Zhao Zhao could already smell the scent of the immortal treasure. Her appetite was truly wild, and it seemed as if she was ready to eat all of Ye Xuan. And finally, she got her long-awaited prize. When she absorbed the recovery fruit, the reaction happened immediately. In front of the young man was no longer that little girl, but a truly grown-up girl. Ye Xuan had managed to save the illusionary realm elf. Zhao Zhao had truly matured, and her attractiveness quotient was not inferior to Liner and her sisters. Apparently, it was that feeling of joy from being nurtured. Zhao wanted to thank our hero for saving her, but she didn't know how. That was when the system came to the rescue with new tasks. The first was to make Zhao wear the designed uniform, for which the reward was an imperial dragon bone. The second was that one could stay true to moral principles, but the wearer would be forever trapped in the illusory realm. And for the sake of the bone, Xuan overpowered himself. Zhao Zhao didn't quite understand what Ye Xuan wanted from her yet, so she looked surprised and even confused. This kind of cloth material was strange to her. But nevertheless, at Xuan's request, she changed her clothes as he wanted. He might have liked the girl's past clothes better, but at this point, it was far more important for him to get the imperial dragon bone. But while they were relaxing and rejoicing in what they had accomplished in the meantime, something fell on them from above. Zhao Zhao was quite quick to react and could manipulate the plants, hence she grabbed Ye Xuan with the vines and pushed him away from the dangerous area. When the huge statue fell to the ground, it crushed everything around it. It was scary to imagine if this huge statue had fallen on our heroes. This statue was an artifact. Liner felt an unusual ancient aura emanating from it. She warned that this item was hardly the kind of item that should be in the possession of a current, so one had to be careful. Ye Xuan dared to kill almost all of the Outer Circle disciples, and thus sentenced himself to death as Ji decided. Of course, Yuan Ji was surprised that a lowly body-tempering cultivator managed to finish off 14 people at the QI stage. He didn't want to let his guard down any longer. Unfortunately, Zhao Zhao was subject to the restrictions of the illusory realm that prevented her from attacking those who were tested here. But she could restrain this blue seal. Zhao concentrated completely on her fingertips and gathered her spiritual powers so that the forces of nature would obey her. And they did, creating a kind of protection for the boys. They acted together. While Ye Xuan attacked, Zhao Zhao kept her defenses firmly in place. One blink and our hero approached Yuan Ji, while he still let his guard down and didn't notice how he was injured. A scar was now left on his face and he was even more angry, wanting to destroy Ye Xuan. The young man confronted Yuan Ji with his own sword, which was legendary to the former master. No wonder there was more and more anger in him every time. But this anger did not help him in any way. On the contrary, it only aggravated the situation. However, one way or another, Ye Xuan would let this degenerate live. When he was on the verge of death, he decided to unleash his artifact from elsewhere. Zhao Zhao's plants couldn't hold such power, and the artifact flew straight towards Zhao Zhao. The girl was in danger. She was too confused to run away or roll over to a safer place. She lay and awaited her fate. But just in time, Brother Xuan still managed to cover her body with him. He vomited blood right on top of her. The weight of the artifact was very heavy, and under the pressure of Yuan Ji's strength, it seemed something fantastic that he was holding it all on top of her. Jay remained fine, but she didn't understand at all why Brother Xuan was so foolish to sacrifice himself. All the time, Zhao Zhao had been calling Ye Xuan Big Brother, and now he completely didn't understand. How could he not protect her? Zhao's soul felt like it had cracked the ice floe that was filling her hole. She had always thought of herself as just an elf who, if she died, the illusory realm would raise a new one. She didn't think her life was worth anything, but even so, it would still be another elf, not Zhao. Yuan Zhi was about to send Ye Xuan to the other world with his attack, but it was more as if he had gone mad. After all, using an artifact like this must consume a huge amount of spiritual energy, but he still managed to activate it one more time. Ye Xuan pondered over what he should do. Even under the protection of the dragon bones, the past attack still didn't leave a living spot on him. Zhao, noticing that her little brother looked confused, asked him if he trusted her, and when she heard a positive answer, she asked permission to protect him this time. Together they traveled away from the cliff where certain death would await them. Such a scenario didn't fit in Yuan Ji's mind at all. After all, he had expected to kill them by himself. Zhao Zhao lead our hero to a spiritual spring, where a colossal amount of spiritualized qi was concentrated, nourishing the core of the entire illusory realm. Yet, Ye Xuan had a lot of luck, Ling Er repeated for the umpteenth time. After all, This spiritual source of the mountain core was the place where spiritualized chi flowed through the earth's veins. For tens of thousands of kilometers around, this place is one of a kind. Seeing it, even great warriors who had attained deification could not pass by. In simple words, Ye Xuan could simply draw energy from the spiritual source and access accelerated growth. If he succeeded, he would not only be able to increase his degree of tempering, but also heal his wounds. After that, the people outside would clearly not be able to defeat him. This should have been the best task of all, to absorb the spiritual source, and in return receive the quintessential destiny of becoming an immortal. But it could be ignored. Xuan was at body hardening, and the capacity of his dantian and meridian was limited. If one decided to lightly absorb a spiritual source, the spiritualized ki would inevitably turn against it, resulting in body rupture and death. There were no penalties in this task, but Ling Er suggested leaving it behind, while Zhao assured otherwise. Even if one gave up the risk and left the source, Yuan Ji was waiting outside and wouldn't let Ye Xuan leave alive, so he decided to trust Zhao and go ahead. In addition, the second sister handed him quite a few spiritual elixirs and pills. It was hoped that they would help reduce the risk of body rupture. Lin Er hadn't been able to persuade him not to absorb energy from the source, and even so, she remained indifferent that he decided to go towards death. And while Ye Xuan was cultivating, he pondered over the fate of an immortal. After all, at what point was it the fate of an immortal? It was more like the purest calamity. Suddenly, images of his sisters began to pop up in his mind because he had promised them that he would protect them. But how could he protect them if he couldn't handle so little? Did he really want to live his life based on his sister's position? Of course not. He didn't forget anything he was talking about, and he didn't throw his words to the wind. Realizing that he had someone to be strong for affected him greatly. He was literally absorbed in the process, and he didn't care about the pain anymore. He just wanted to get stronger. He had a goal. Zhao Zhao had been watching Ye Xuan the entire time, and was in complete control of the process. When she realized that he could take no more, she gathered all the spiritual forces of nature. Zhao Zhao was giving it her all so that the process of replenishing him with energy would be as gentle as possible and not bring him to his death. But Lin Er was already worried beyond belief, because what Zhao was doing could call for her death if she continued to do so. As she had promised, she protected her baby brother practically at the cost of her life, just as he had once protected her. The illusory realm elf had given up her bodily shell to become a mediator between Yi Xuan's meridians and the illusory realm. The final stage of body hardening had been reached. Ye Xuan no longer possessed the same strength as before. It had increased by leaps and bounds. The broken bones and wounds he received from the ancient artifact recovered instantly. But Lin Er still couldn't understand where he got such charisma that he was able to induce the elf to protect him by discarding his body. He realized with fear what had happened. Zhao Zhao had lost her body to save Ye Xuan. This alone made him feel miserable, yet she was still alive. That fruit of recovery had helped her original spirit survive. Zhao would be able to return, but her recovery might take several hundred years. Ye Xuan was completely confused and disappointed after all. He thought he would do without sacrifices, and he didn't want her to suffer because of him. But Zhao Zhao didn't regret anything. After all, Ye Xuan had protected her and she wanted to reciprocate him. And as long as the illusory realm existed, so did she. 100 years later, they would see each other again. There was no more pain, just anger and hatred, a desire for revenge. It was quickly replaced by sympathy and pain. After managing to complete the first task, Ye Xuan received an additional reward, a capture talisman that allowed him to capture any item once. Meanwhile, Yuan Ji was patiently waiting for our hero, who literally jumped out of the cliff. There was no sweet talk. Ye Xuan immediately got down to business, pouncing on his enemy with his fists. Ji wasn't going to give up and put his fist out in response. When the blow from Ye Xuan hit his body, he immediately realized that he had reached the final stage of body hardening. But he didn't know how. A more serious strike Ye Xuan decided to dedicate for himself. The second blow he dedicated for the current of higher fencing, and the third blow was for Zhao Zhao. That was the reason why she had to sacrifice herself for her brother. Yuan decided to fight to the end and summoned his artifact, which was what Ye Xuan wanted. And when that happened, our hero ordered the system to engage the capture talisman. The initial appearance of the capture system may have been rather weak, but in action it was incredible. It turned out to be golden, powerful chains that could seemingly capture anything. The capture was successful. How did the situation suddenly turn out after all? Yuan Ji was bereft without any pluses, and he was also weak, In terms of strength, he clearly couldn't match Ye Xuan. But it seems like he should also try out the power of this artifact on himself. When the artifact went down and up, there was no UNG underneath it. There was only a huge hole. Apparently this creep had escaped to the celestial level. If not fighting, at least he was running around properly. This was a dangerous situation for him. But he hoped that at least he wasn't in danger here. No matter how fast Ye Xuan's tempering speed was, Ji hoped that he would not be able to enter the heavenly level. UNG planned to shatter the teleportation scroll and go outside. Somehow he was sure that his uncle, along with the rest of the elders, would be able to hold Ye Xuan accountable for killing the disciples. And when that happened and he was captured, Ji was already counting on being able to do whatever he wanted with him. But apparently his ghostly plans were not destined to come true. He thought that only those who had reached the final stage of tempering were able to pass to the celestial level. But how did Ye Xuan manage it if he had only reached the initial stage? UNZ was completely desperate. He didn't want to fight anymore because he couldn't, and so he was willing to do anything, Ye Xuan said, as long as he didn't kill him. For a moment, Ye Xuan smiled sadly. When he saw the green butterfly, he immediately thought as if it was his little sister. Did this moron really think that he would be spared after Zhao Zhao died because of him? The outcome of this fool's life was a foregone conclusion. He died under his own artifact. And the system congratulated Ye Xuan on successfully eliminating both the Qi-quenching cultivator and the Qi-quenching cultivator, and provided 77 points in the original 8 trigrams mirror. Finally, the journey was over, and the elders were already waiting for their students at the portal. Many disciples had already come out, but UNG still had no way of seeing his nephew, but he didn't care much. He was sure that his Ji would come out at the very last moment. Since birth, he possessed 2 spirit roots, and surely he couldn't rest until he achieved the heaven stage technique. But this was how he showed outwardly. In reality, he was worried, for the nephew was really slow. Did he really need so much time to eliminate the worthless Ye Xuan, he thought? The time limit of the trial had already been reached. The illusory realm was closing. UNG and Ye Xuan still hadn't come out. Their mentors were starting to worry. UNZ could no longer hold back and begged Huang Yuezhong to stop the closing of the illusory realm. But she couldn't. There was a time limit that had already been reached. There was a minuscule gap left, but the students felt someone coming out of it. Our hero jumped out of there and landed in a hurry. Huang Yuezhong exhaled a sigh of relief, as if she had passed some tragedy, while UNG couldn't calm down and couldn't understand why Ye Xuan came out and not his nephew. Oh, but what's the matter? Mentor Yuan was surprised by Ye Xuan's safe return. He didn't know what to say. The illusory realm had closed, and Ji still hadn't shown up, along with his 10-something disciples. None of them had returned. It is only possible to open the passage to the illusory realm once a year, and when it closes, it is impossible to return alive. UNZ did not want to let their deaths be in vain and felt obliged to stir up the matter. He wanted to tie Ye Xuan to what had happened with all his might. Only by finishing him off would he be able to retain control of the inner circle. Therefore, he immediately started blaming Ye Xuan for the deaths of his disciples and nephew. But how could they see that he had killed someone? The elders didn't know who else to suspect, since they had given everyone protective artifacts. And how could it be that no one came back alive? UNZ was revered, so the other elders were quick to reinforce his rebellion, and began to rebel against Ye Xuan, even though they had no clear evidence. Of course, Huang Yuezhong stood up for him, and he looked quite confident as if it wasn't about him at all. Despite this, Yuan continued to hurl accusations at our hero. After all, killing one's own is a crime punishable by death. Huang Yuezhong herself had made this law, so Ye Xuan should be executed. But Elder Yuan was taking on too much, and his shouts could be heard even from the Immortal's grotto. Everyone greeted the third elder who appeared. Dongfang Shifeng. It was third sister who was in charge of enforcing the laws here, and it was not UNG's prerogative to punish students. Perhaps if the third sister hadn't come, Ye Xuan would have continued to be attacked like this. UNZ was so angry that he couldn't even speak calmly. He felt as if all the elders were conspiring against him. In a whisper, Huang warned Dongfang that this old man was only looking for an excuse to stir up a rebellion by taking advantage of Nangong's absence. The elders were secretly exchanging information amongst themselves. They planned to use this scandal to prevent Nangong Zhao from gaining a foothold at the peak of the primordial spirit. If it doesn't come out of the shutter, they only wanted to inflate the case as much as possible. Apparently they were serious about it. This bunch of old, cunning people from the outer circle were not sitting still. Zhuan needed to resolve the incident as quickly as possible. so as not to cause his sisters any trouble. And yet the younger Yuan knew how to make a big deal out of nothing. The defendant himself decided to enter the conflict. Yes, only the appeal of the younger. Yuvani didn't like it at all. But after all, in fact, in terms of seniority, Yuan was indeed a younger brother to Yeshuan. The other elder confirmed Yeshuan's words. After all, he was the last personal disciple of the previous head. Hence his position was indeed higher, and they were his junior brothers. But that's when the elder realized that he had better not say it. Yuan was ready to burn him with his gaze. In order for Yuan not to boil over anymore, Yeshuan suggested that he investigate the incident. With Huang Yuzhong's strength, one could force open a small gap into the illusory realm. Everyone had reached the primordial spirit, so with perception techniques, everything could be investigated. If the disciples died, their bodies will be found. Again, the other elder offered his help. He felt he could handle the matter. He had a crystal mirror at his disposal, capable of breaking through any illusion and encompassing all living things. If one looked closely, one could see that this item was an exact replica of the precious mirror that Zhuan had received as a reward. Without a doubt, it was surely the other half. There was nothing to do, and Yuan asked Huang Yuzhong to use this item to reveal the truth. This old man was counting on the fact that one lead would be enough for him, and with the help of this scandal he would still be able to tame the inner circle. Xuan didn't want to stop there, for he was offended by the words said against him. If there was no proof that he had killed someone, he hoped to get that mirror from his younger brothers as moral compensation. Yuan didn't understand what moral compensation was even talked about. Then his colleague had to explain that Xuan just wanted to bet with them on something. Yuan liked the idea, and if his colleague put up his mirror, he promised him the top position among the elders, and he would add 100,000 spiritual stones on top. Adding another 100,000 spirit stones on top, the colleague still agreed to such a deal, and Huang Yuezhong was already getting down to her business. Everyone was waiting for this moment. After all, everything would be decided now. The mirror indeed could show everything in the illusory world, and the territory of the illusory realm looked quite normal, and there was nothing suspicious there. Then how could more than a dozen people just vaporize? There was quite possibly the possibility that they overestimated their own strength and died in the reserved realms trying to obtain techniques. Yuanzi still didn't stop arguing and thought that everyone was conspiring around him. As long as he didn't find his nephew, he wouldn't get Ye Xuan's mirror. This arrangement did not suit not only our hero, but also the third sister. As they say, if you like to play, you have to pay. She took the mirror from the elder's hands herself, and of course she gave it to Ye Xuan. And in addition, she closed the matter, and anyone who was tempted to make a scandal about it again would be expelled from the current. It turned out that this chatty duck could also fly. But Yuan wasn't going to rest until he settled accounts with Ye Xuan. Now he must compensate his colleague for his losses. Ye Xuan stared at these halves of the mirror for a long time, but he couldn't figure out what he needed to do to put them together. I guess he would have to call a professional. At last, he could rest after all those hard days, but even the reservoir was not calm. The third sister, Dongfang Xifeng, literally came out of the water, so she decided to find out where her little brother had disappeared to. She had the feeling that he was keeping more and more secrets every day. She came for a reason but wanted to know if Ye Xuan had really killed Yuan and the other disciples. Ye Xuan denied it. Did he really want to lie to his sister? In that case, she decided to find out for herself what kind of scam he was pulling. Dongfang decided to resort to clever tricks, because her brother didn't want to confess anything. But in that case, she shouldn't expect Ye Xuan to play fair. Our hero got all cocky and reached for his third sister's breasts. She immediately recoiled from him and prepared to punch him. Discarding all worldly things, Ye Xuan in that instant decided to become a Buddha. After this strike, she realized, Ye Xuan had reached qi hardening. Moreover, his bodily shell level had already reached physical enhancement. Now she was not surprised that he had managed to kill Yuan, but where such strength came from, she didn't know. Ye Xuan warmed up in a flash and explained that he had his own methods, but he couldn't explain everything to his sisters. Dongfang was fine with that for now. And no matter how one looked at it, with this development, they might have hope at the Five Perfections Convention. Even though the high swordsmanship current was one of the Five Perfections, the war that happened 10 years ago had severely affected their fighting ability. The other factions were just waiting to divide up the land and wealth. The head of the Five Perfections Alliance, the self-proclaimed Lin Wanli, could be safely called the first tyrant in every corner of the world. For days on end, all he could think about was how to steal other people's disciples and devour new lands. The head of the Perfect Sword Palace, Jian Wuji, had been defeated by Lin Wanli not too long ago. As a result, Jian Wuji and all of his household descended to become his maid dogs. There was also a Western faction known as the Celestial Sword Manor. Its head was an old Cretan named Zhong Hao. He practiced oddball swordsmanship techniques that require him to torture girls to perfect, so he was constantly pestering Nangong Zhao. He slept and saw how he could appropriate her for himself. And the Great Sword Faction was a bunch of complete madmen. In all these years, Dongfeng hadn't even been able to find out the background of these savages. They had been collecting immortal treasures for days on end, and there was no telling when their eyes would turn towards the current. All in all, nothing good could be expected from this foursome in relation to the flow. Dongfang Shifeng provided business cards of their students who would be participating in the competition, and advised Ye Xuan to get to know them. Speaking from the Myriad Sword Alliance was Lun Ze, who had perfected for 11 years the spirit root of the 5 elements heavenly rank, the peak of the grounding of the foundations. The perfect sword palace sent out Meng Jianfei, perfected for 15 years, had an abnormal paired root spirit of earth and metal, was at the peak foundation stage. Celestial Sword Manor, Shui Yunqi, had perfected for 13 years, had a perfect water-type spirit root, was at the peak foundation stage. The Great Sword Faction was represented by Xiao Gutu. He had refined for 5 years, had a bone spirit root, and was at the middle foundation stage. Ye Xuan was astonished when he realized that 3 of the 4 were already at the peak of groundwork. How much had they put in to achieve such results? Only there was another question. What kind of master would send the current? Without a doubt, Dongfeng Shifeng, as if Yi had planned this in advance, replied that the current was sending Ye Xuan. Not even a day had passed since he had reached qi tempering. But Nangong Zhao thought that it was time for Ye Xuan to see the world. Now he had to decide on a choice in the system. If he bravely accepted it, he would receive 200 contribution points or 1 artifact of his choice. If he gave up, he would be considered a coward. Without a doubt, this amount of points was very attractive. Ye Xuan immediately made the decision to go to this convention. This was very ambitious on Ye Xuan's part. And out of respect for Third Sister's determination, Third Sister promised him a reward. If Ye Xuan won, Dongfang would give him the opportunity to pair cultivate with her. Information about Ye Xuan quickly came out of the current. He had been refining for 130 years, but only today had reached the initial stage of qi tempering. Since his spirit root was damaged, the properties of the new root were unknown. Reading this, the faction heads reacted differently to Ye Xuan. Some thought they were being joked at, some took Xuan seriously, and some were just interested in Nangong even more. After the information about Ye Xuan, new information came in. Everyone spread that he was a loser who lived off women. The strongest in history when it came to using his connections. Ye Xuan, he's already Nangong Zhao's favorite. The current supreme swordsmanship is a disgrace to the 5 perfections. After talking about him like that, Ye Xuan's ear even itched, but as Omen says, someone must have praised him. As soon as he had some free time, Ye Xuan went to the Fire God Mountain. He had to participate in the 5 perfection swordsmanship convention, and his cultivation was still poor. He needed to prepare his equipment to the highest standard and provide himself with suitable artifacts, so he started calling Madame Nango. But surely this fool has once again plunged like an obsessive into the study of artifact casting. Unfortunately, it was impossible to call out to her without resorting to a deadly technique. What a pity, but if nobody wanted this hair, why not throw it into the lava? It worked. Madame Nango immediately appeared and snatched the plush hair toy from Ye Xuan's hands. She just didn't understand how he could even think of such a thing. Ye Xuan was glad that the 6th sis had finally shown up after all. He wanted to ask her for help. Before getting down to business, Nango didn't lose sight of the fact that her brother had changed a great deal since their last meeting. It was obvious to her that his spirit root had been restored, and his physical shell strengthened many times over. Also, from his left hand, a kind of powerful force seemed to be sensed. Perhaps it was the kind of power that could be achieved after being a bachelor for 100 years. In that case, why don't they stretch out? Ye Xuan only just remembered that 6th sister just loved to use brute force. When she met a person with a tolerable temperament, she couldn't help but scuffle with him. He tried to stop her and let her know that he was here on business after all and fighting would be unnecessary. But it was as if she had gone deaf and continued to rampage. Her interests were now paramount. Finally, when she struck with her hammer but luckily missed, she suddenly wondered what the matter was. Ye Xuan explained that he wanted to prepare for the 5 Perfections convention. So he expected that with Nango's artifact casting skills, fusing such 2 halves wouldn't be difficult. First of all, Sis was surprised that Ye Xuan would even represent the current of higher swordsmanship. But when you think about it that way, didn't that mean her current was going to smack her face in the dirt on her own field? She couldn't let that happen, not over her dead body. Yi Shen hurriedly explained that this wouldn't happen if she fixed the mirror for him. But it was too late for an explanation. Since the blow has already been dealt, and our hero has not even managed to escape anywhere. Madame Nango hoped, however, that her brother would be able to keep his word and not disgrace the current. The blow was painful, but when Ye Xuan stood up, he saw the mirror already assembled under his feet. He couldn't believe it had happened so fast. But now he was sure that with this toy, victory was in his pocket. It was a mid-category spiritual treasure that was a fusion of the original mirror of the 8 trigrams and the crystal mirror of the fire eye. It was capable of performing spiritual light attacks, destroying illusory techniques, and breaking through any falsehood. The properties of the mirror allowed to predict fortunes and troubles, to predict fate. The special ability of reflection allowed to fully reflect and redirect any attack. But after 3 uses, the mirror collapses. It lacked a rare spirit stone that could act as the soul of an artifact. If it were available, the number of uses would have grown significantly. Nango had seen such stones when she was mining at Yunmen Lake. If she was not mistaken, then this time the competition would be held there. The big bell had already struck, which meant the convention of the 5 perfections had begun. Madame Nango immediately turned into a most gracious girl and wished her brother good luck in the competition, patting him on the shoulder in a friendly manner. But even this kind of courtesy was very painful for Ye Xuan. Lastly, she decided to say that soul stones were a natural treasure, but they were almost always guarded by strong demonic beasts. And Ye Xuan had to be careful. But he no longer listened to his sissy and vanished to make it to the meeting on time. Elders and apprentices in the currents of the highest swordsmanship awaited their guests on the misty peak. Since the head himself had personally appointed Ye Xuan as the main member from their current, no one had said a word against it. However, in order to prevent losing face, Yuan decided to nominate an outer circle disciple named Xiaohu Mao as the second member. After all, Xiaohu Mao was Yuan Ji's personal disciple and possessed a rare thunder-type spirit root. His talents were also admirable. In just 15 years, he had reached the peak of groundwork. Things were bad because each faction was fielding up to 2 contestants, and Yuan Ji's suggestion was quite appropriate. Xiaohu Mao was indeed at a high level of tempering, but the sisters were worried that they were planning an attack on Ye Xuan. The first to arrive was the Cloud Dragon ship that housed the representatives of the Perfect Sword Palace. Only people of Perfect Sword were capable of developing such a large vessel and controlling it in the air through formation activation. During combat operations, such a unit was of great benefit. Meng Yanfei led the other disciples to arrive at the site. He was the first disciple of the Perfect Sword Palace. Meng Qianfei had just come down and began to openly scoff at the flow of the supreme swordsmanship. The leadership here had changed to a crowd of girl elders, which he thought was decadent. Following the disciple of the Perfect Sword Palace, the disciples from the Celestial Sword Manor flew in on storks. Shui Yunqi politely greeted the elders and thanked them for their hospitality. Many people who saw Shui Yunqi were surprised to see him live. They all knew that he possessed a perfect water-type spirit root, and in just 13 years, he had managed to reach the peak of groundwork. One could say for them, he was a kind of idol. Following him, the Great Sword faction arrived. Xiao Gutu arrived without any other disciples, representing the Great Sword faction alone. What was the Great Sword faction thinking of sending just one person to the Congress? But on the other hand, Xiao Gutu was quite enough. After all, he was their first genius. And here comes the union of the myriad swords. Tong Dajiang hadn't descended yet, but he was already wondering where the head of the supreme swordsmanship current was. The first disciple of the myriad swords union, Lunze, was accompanying him. Tong Dajiang was a bit stunned that no one had still bowed their head to the leader of the 5 perfections union of myriad swords. Dongfeng explained that the head of their faction was in lockdown, so it was difficult for her to show her face, and if there were any issues, they had to be resolved with her. But such an answer didn't suit Tong Dajian. He wanted to see Nangong Zhao. And then Ye Xuan appeared just in time to speak out in his direction, as if Tong Dajian was bursting with verbal diarrhea. Tong Dajiang immediately turned his attention to this brat, not noticing when he had even appeared here and how dare he show disrespect to the Myriad Sword Alliance. In the blink of an eye, he landed right in front of Ye Xuan, leaving behind a shattered floor. He was annoyed that the higher fencing current had a complete lack of manners of education. But he, that old prick, came running into foreign territory and shouting at the top of his lungs like he was at home, and he opened his mouth and demanded the head to meet him. Who does he think he is? He was just an elder of the Myriad Swords Alliance, and Ye Xuan was a successor disciple of the Supreme Swordsmanship Current in a straight line, ranked highest in seniority. And based on seniority, Tong Dajian should respectfully call Ye Xuan elder brother. Senior Tong should have kept his cool. Why would he rant to someone like that? Lung Che promised to kill Ye Xuan during the competition. Ye Xuan didn't hesitate to twist Lun Ze's name into Goze, which literally meant something. And of course, he wished him good luck in the exam. This kind of good luck wish was not appreciated by Lun Che. He was annoyed that Ye Xuan was talking too much and wanted to see how he would be able to prove himself in the competition. As an elder, Ye Xuan decided to say something, namely that with this kind of behavior, they were clearly not going to do well. As fellow Five Perfections, they should unanimously discuss the course of action of the Myriad Swords Alliance, the essence of which is the abuse of power to oppress the weak, despotism and the politics of brute force. Some people are virtuous in word, but in deed they are scoundrels and scoundrels. It was time to wake up from this dream. This was something that could be conveyed to Lin Wanli. At this statement, Xiao Gutu and Shui Yongqi only smiled lightly. They were basically not conflicted. They were not interested in this, but they were amused to watch. The elders were shocked by Ye Xuan's behavior. It was as if he was seeking his own death, and he was also pulling the entire current with him. No one interfered in this altercation. Tong Dajian stood still, as if he thought that everything would be decided for him. Watching this, Lin Wanli did not understand at all why, and still no one had finished off this ignorant boy. As if sensing that his master was thinking about it, Tong Dajiang decided to actually kill Ye Xuan by pointing multiple swords at him. But a shield appeared right in front of Xuan, protecting him from the attack. This shield was created by Nangong Zhao. She was very angry that someone dared to attack her ward. She promised that if it happened again, she would blow off Tong Dajiang's head with the next blow. Tong Dajiang could now personally verify that Nangong Zhao was indeed at the peak of her original spirit, with a single technique to bring Tong Dajiang to obedience. The guests could see that the stories about the strength of the head of the high swordsmanship current were indeed not empty words. At this rate, the current could once again proudly raise its head. Nangong Zhao was really cool. Ye Xuan didn't expect anything less from his girl. And Ye Xuan had completed his next task and expressed his dissatisfaction with the Myriad Swords Union, for which he received a true elixir of natural creation. Such an act could have serious consequences, but our hero didn't care. Maybe they would start maintaining a semblance of decency. In addition, Ye Xuan began to realize the relationship between the two of them, and the rumor that the Myriad Swords Alliance had annexed the Perfect Sword Palace was not an idle rumor at all. The Celestial Sword Manor and the Great Sword Faction were clearly not their comrades, but that hardly meant that they would help the current supreme swordsmanship. Nangong called Ye Xuan a little scoundrel because he had stolen something from her. Although it would be hard to call it stolen, more like just borrowed for a while. Still, grateful that Ye Xuan had helped Ye Xuan reach Nangong Peak, she decided to let him get away with it. But at this Congress, she expected Ye Xuan to win. It was surprising that Sis had counted on Ye Xuan to win against this bunch of monsters at the foundation laying. But in return, she promised a reward, of course. Ye Xuan simply couldn't risk it, even though it was obvious to him that he was unlikely to win. Each faction could field a maximum of 2 competitors, whose tempering was no higher than the peak of grounding. The venue of the competition was the Yuimen Lake area, located at the foot of the high fencing mountains. The essence of this trial was the extermination of demonic beasts. Killing a single beast of the body quenching stage gave 1 point. The chi quenching stage gave 5 points. The foundation establishment stage gave 30 points. And the elixir completion stage gave 100 points. The proof of killing beasts would be their internal pills. The hunting period was 10 days. The winner would be the one with the most points. Yunmen Lake was also famous for demonic beasts at the deification stage. Once the convention started, the participants would not be able to contact the outside world or teleport. Survival would depend solely on them. But the Union of Myriad Swordsmen wished to make one rule. The disciples participating in the competition had the right to fight each other and take away the inner pills. Before making a decision, Nangong asked for Ye Xuan's opinion, because it was obvious that this old man wanted Ye Xuan to not survive the ordeal. Our hero didn't care. so he suggested to agree. In that case, Nangongjao decided to announce the official start of the convention. A huge portal that was more like a watery space opened in front of the students. Everyone had already saddled their swords and flew towards him. Then Xiahou Mao wondered, why didn't Yeshuan climb his sword? It was simple, he just didn't know how and he didn't hide it. When the real competition began, Lunzi suggested that the others not to worry about extracting inner pills. Above all, he wanted them all to help finish off Yeshuan. He wanted that brat to not live to see tomorrow. Yi Xuan, along with his so-called ally, were in the area of the peat bogs. Xiahou Mao didn't want to waste time fumbling around with Xuan. Otherwise, it would be hard for him to explain his inaction. Besides, they had already gone deep into the neighborhood, so no one outside would know anything. It was time to act, so Xiahou Mao made a sign. Yi Xuan immediately guessed that this traitor must have colluded with the outsiders and decided to betray the current supreme swordsmanship. You see, the Five Perfections Congress was originally supposed to be a matter for the young, but that old dog Tong also showed up for some reason, and it's clearly not a coincidence. It seems like they made a deal on the side and wanted to kill Ye Xuan. Or else they decided to go against Nangongjao. Ye Xuan's vigilance was commendable. But it was already too late. Lun Che had promised Xiahou Mao second place. As for Nangong, she was going to become Lin Wanli's cauldron, the contents of which he would devour without a trace, while Yuan Ji would become the next head. But apparently, Xiahou Mao had been struck by lightning when he was still a child, after which his head was completely out of whack. Did he really think he could take his older brother by surprise with his antics? Did he really think he had been led here to the peat bog for nothing? To prove that this was not an accident, Ye Xuan kicked the floor as hard as possible with his foot. Yes, so that cracks occurred there. There was just enough of a small crack for a serious break to occur, and winged ants flew out of it. A swarm of bloody ants swooped down directly on Xiahou Mao. He had no choice but to run away. Ye Xuan was prepared. He used the masking liquid that his fourth sister made him. After using it, the ants would mistake our hero for their own. The sisters knew all the bugs of this world, and these ants attacked in swarms and showed savage cruelty enough to kill Xiahou Mao. After that, Xiahou dared to call Xuan a scoundrel. It was expected, but it was interesting to see the masterful swordsmanship displayed by an outstanding student during. No longer was the ease and calmness that Xiahou was showing us. He was angry and ready to chop Ye Xuan into pieces. When Xiahou Mao killed the blood ants, they left behind pills. This was certainly an excellent boil for Ye Xuan. He left his seeds and immediately rushed to collect them in his packet. Xiahou Mao of course resented that this scoundrel was taking all his pills. And while our hero was doing this, the Queen of Ants apparently came up to him to say hello. She was certainly not the most pleased, for all her children had been practically slaughtered, and now they were quietly gathering their belongings. Ye Xuan could no longer hold back his tears. He was very upset that his brothers had suffered a brutal death, and there weren't even any bodies left. But now, in memory of them, he will only be able to keep their inner pills. Then he turned his attention to the killer of those ants. He surely wished to kill him to avenge his brothers. Liner didn't understand why Ye Xuan didn't leave. After all, the participants from the myriad sword side would reach here very soon. But apparently, he was counting on Lun Ce not daring to rashly provoke the blood ants. In general, Xiahou Mao was at the peak of laying the groundwork. The valuables in his storage ring were not to be written off either, and the plan was to sell it to the system. Liner noticed that Ye Xuan was starting to think just like the most villainous uncle mentor in all of history. But it wasn't difficult. His hand couldn't even shake for a moment when he needed to kill someone from the outer circle. Xiahou Mao was beginning to realize that Ye Xuan was not attacked by ants because of that liquid. He thought that if he killed Ye Xuan and got that liquid, he could get out of here alive. Fortunately, the master handed him a swiftness talisman before departing. With it, he would be able to gain an attack speed that even Buddha barely possessed. And when he still managed to deal with the ants, he immediately pointed his sword towards Ye Xuan. But beating him was not so easy. Xiahou put full force into his punch, but Ye Xuan easily withstood it. And the master had told him earlier that he was the first scum of the current. But oops. What a surprise. Apparently, Yuan Ji had forgotten to mention something before sending his disciple into battle. Namely, Ye Xuan's body was at the physical strengthening stage, and it would be difficult to penetrate the mentor uncle with such blows. It was as if Xiahou Mao's entire world trembled. After all, such limits were only available to golden elixir cultivators, and here this scum had physical amplification. Our hero didn't explain anything else, but only showed his junior the immortal technique of tearing bricks. After such appealing, Xiahou Mao's face was left nothing but a bloody mess, and nothing of that handsome blonde. But the follower of the outer current was not going to give up and use the lightning attraction technique that was available to geniuses with thunder-type spirit roots. He had to strain literally all of his strength and wits to accomplish such a thing. It was a surprise to Ye Xuan that the thunder spirit root also had such a use. Taking on a lightning strike was tantamount to recharging it. This trump card Xiahou Mao hoped to use against Lun Ce in the battle for first place, but now Ye Xuan would taste it first. He wanted to make him experience pain 100 times worse than the bites of 1,000 ants. It seemed like nothing more than a ponce, but Ye Xuan should have taken the matter seriously as well. Xiahou Mao was sure that even Lun Ce wouldn't be able to survive this reception, and Ye Xuan's seriousness wasn't worth a dime at all. Yi Xuan was really serious in his intentions. He decided to use the spiritual radiance mirror to repel the attack. Xiahou Mao didn't know anything about it, and just laughed at who Xuan hoped the worthless mirror would save him. This strike was really powerful, and the reflection was correspondingly powerful. The reflection rays literally pierced through Xiahou's chest, and finally he hovered in the air, as if he was held not by a reflection, but by a very real sword. As the saying goes, he who laughs last. Xiahou didn't know that it was actually a deadly weapon. He fell on the first day of the competition, never made it to the end. The only thing that was a pity was the spiritual radiance mirror, because it could be used 2 more times. Therefore, it was necessary to go deep into the lake area and find the soul stone. Xiahou Mao possessed a thunder spirit root and good stats, so Linner decided to give 50 contribution points for him. But it seemed too cheap. That creep had almost killed Ye Xuan, so he wanted 100. So Linner raised it to 60. In the end, bargained for 70 points. All in all, our hero had accumulated 220 points and collected a bunch of inner pill demonic beasts. The sisters had told before that after suffering heavy losses, the blood ants would move to another place to keep from being attacked by beasts in the neighborhood. And they were right. There were a lot of second-level demonic beasts in the cave, which meant that there simply had to be a lot of spiritual treasures in there. And it's time to see for yourself. The cave really did have awesome deposits of spirit stones. This journey for Ye Xuan was still not in vain. And now, for a brief moment, it all belonged to him. He was ready to lick these stones, for they had great potential. And as he passed, he felt that he had stepped on something. It was an imperial dragon bone. Our hero can be said to be the king of luck. This time, he had a rich harvest. No one could know about this cave, and specifically its contents. So he decided to use his older sister's shackles to escape. These shackles of illusory art held back the flow of aura, preventing it from being detected by anyone whose strength was below the peak of the primordial spirit. Meanwhile, the others would loiter and search for Ye Xuan while he was alone with his treasures and cultivating. But very soon, he would be able to keep them company, having already become stronger. Lun Ce still came to the swamp with his associates. They sensed that there was a nest of blood ants in the vicinity. They had been following Ye Xuan, but suddenly, his aura disappeared. The place was too clean, and there wasn't even a trace of blood, let alone bodies. The ants had moved to another place. It was obvious to the boys that they had suffered great losses facing an attack by beasts of a different species. All the internal pills had disappeared. This proved that someone had taken advantage of Xiahou Mao's plight for their own gain and even disposed of his corpse. Lun Ce was sure that Ye Xuan was still alive, so he suggested that everyone split up and find him. Meanwhile, congratulations kept coming from the system. Ye Xuan successfully drained the Emperor Dragon Bone on the right leg, on the spine. During this time, he had also managed to reach the 8th level in tempering the Royal Dragon Elephant technique, and the strength of his bodily shell had reached the 4th stage of indestructibility. The Heavenly Tao Spirit Root was indeed a useful thing. The breakthroughs were relatively slow, but the consolidation on the new stages was beyond praise. With Ye Xuan's current performance, he could display a strength of at least 50,000 kilograms. But all his pondering ended when he heard the roar of the demonic beast. It was a great opportunity to test out my new skills. Meanwhile, Xiaogutu could be seen upstairs, who was persistently fighting with someone. His opponent was a Nanotyrannus. This creature was much larger than the Royal Dragon Elephant, and correspondingly stronger. But if you compared this level 3 Nanotyrannus to humans, their strength was equal to the Golden Elixir stage. Xiaogutu was at the middle foundation stage, so he was a big step behind the beast. But in spite of that, I still risked a one-on-one confrontation with the beast. But unfortunately, he didn't hold on for long, because more monsters came later, and it was only logical to get out of here. This time, Yi Xuan was lucky and Xiaogutu along with the cat ran straight towards him. For some reason, Ye Xuan began to impersonate the cat, and it latched onto his arm. The nano-tyrannus were very angry, and apparently hungry, so they quickened their pace and were now running after Ye Xuan. As Xuan ran, he activated the divine level selection again. Now he was faced with the choice of helping the cat and Xiaogutu, or running away and saving his own skin. If he successfully helped, the reward would be the title of Scoop Servant, an immortal treasure with the property of developing a pocket cat house. But he decided to give up such an advantage, and preferred to lose the young man's favor than to forfeit his life. It was none of his business, and he just happened to be here at all, so he brought the cat back. As he ran, piercing glances were thrown at his back. No one expected him to be so set up. To Xiaogutu's surprise, the cat somehow decided to run to our hero again. And while he was trying to get away from the monsters, the cat landed right on his head. But this cat didn't like Ye Xuan. He considered it as a walking misfortune and threw it away again. But the cat clung to our hero's back with even greater zeal, as if to make his serious intentions clear. On that day, humanity remembered the horror that was life under the cat's oppression. Ye Xuan didn't have the courage he was giving up, and in that case, Leonor decided to consider it as if her ward had chosen to save the cat and Xiaogutu. And it was as if the cat was waiting for Xuan to start doing something instead of just running around like a selfish man. If the monsters were going to eat him, he wanted to start by rewarding them with his so-called brick. But he didn't have time to use his artifact, as Xiaogutu was much faster and kinder towards our hero. Still didn't leave him in trouble. Suddenly, Ye Xuan was overcome with a sense of security, as if being the lazy older brother he was under the protection of his talented younger brother. Xiaogutu ran as far as he could with his live cargo, but the monsters were not lagging behind and were very close by. And that was the moment when the monster befell our heroes after all. Xiaogutu quickly made a decision and flung the cat and Ye Xuan in different directions, as if giving them a chance to escape. When the explosion occurred, he was thrown back into the cliff where he hit the wall hard. Ye Xuan was also a bit hurt. With a glance, he immediately found his savior. That one muttered to himself to Ye Xuan to take the cat, which he called a Bailyash, and get out of here quickly. Ye Xuan stiffened as if he wanted to say something to this young man. That young man didn't understand what Xuan stiffened and snapped at him, shouting for him to save his life. Our hero calmed Xiao down and asked him to watch carefully as his big brother curbed a couple of nano-tyrannus. It seemed to the young man as if the elder had lost his mind and decided to show off while on chi tempering. But he really headed towards the monsters. Xiaogutu had heard many unflattering words about Ye Xuan, but now he could see that he was not at all as worthless as the rumors described him to be. But how much his opinion changed when he saw that Ye Xuan was using his older sister Nangong's worn underwear. That's what he actually stole from her. That was just crazy. Ye Xuan had decided to let the monsters smell his sister's underwear. Well, rotten is rotten. This thing was attached to the body of a master at the peak of the original spirit, and now the monsters had realized what a true dragon was. They were no match for Nangong. Still, Xuan hadn't stolen this item for nothing, risking his life as if he knew it would come in handy. Meanwhile, Sister Nangong herself was sneezing. She felt as if someone was sneering at her. But she thought about Ye Xuan. She was surprised by his antics. After all, he had found something to steal. Even so, she was worried about how he was now. The monsters, after sniffing the laundry, immediately changed, now putting conditions here, Xuan. They had to voluntarily give up the inner pills, and then Ye Xuan would be able to save their lives. They were in agreement, and each helped the other get the pills out of their bodies. And after a couple of minutes, third-level demonic pills could be seen in front of Ye Xuan. I guess there would definitely be a use for them after washing them. In tears, the nano-tyrants ran away, fearing for their lives. In Xiaogutu's eyes, Ye Xuan had once again become some kind of pervert. But even still, all of this had saved their lives. Xiao felt indebted to Ye Xuan because he had saved his life. And since the Belach recognized Ye Xuan as his master, Xiao asked him to take care of him properly. He only fed on the internal pills of demonic beasts of the third level and above. By raising him properly, one could obtain a reliable assistant. And in the future, if need be, Ye Xuan could blow the bone whistle and Xiaogutu would come to the rescue. As soon as Xiao paid up, he immediately left despite Ye Xuan's pleas for him not to go, because there wasn't a living spot on him. Stealing a primordial spirit warrior's underwear and using it to chase away demonic beasts, Ye Xuan was now considered a promiscuous type deservedly. But he had accomplished the task and received his rewards. Now he had a new pet to deal with, one that fed only on the pills of high-level beasts. Apparently the Belyash didn't like being held like that, and he showed our hero about it. Ye Xuan got angry in jest, and immediately rushed after the cat that had gone to the toilet unsuccessfully. And while they were playing catch-up, they were being watched from on high on an eagle. The enemy immediately informed Lunche that Ye Xuan was not dead after all and had been found. Xuan was still trying to catch up with the Squirtle to see if he was a cat or a cat, but he didn't even notice the danger behind him, unlike his new cat, who noticed it almost immediately. Apparently, the disciple of the Myriad Sword Alliance, Shen Ye, wanted to have some fun with Ye Xuan. But first of all, he's going to have some fun with the Bile-Yash. Even Xuan was surprised at this cat. The Shen Ye's sacred beast belonged to the 4th level, but Belash didn't even stop even that. One also had to consider that there was a common spiritual and bodily origin between Shen Ye and his sacred beast. When one suffered, both suffered. Therefore, not only the bird felt the pain, but also him. Belash created a great position to attack. Ye Xuan noticed it. And of course, he didn't miss that chance, sending the sword flying. Shen Ye was too careless and didn't think that this scum like him would turn out to be an animal mentor. Yes, even with such a dangerous spiritual beast. Calculating that Ye Xuan possessed proper swordsmanship, Shen Ye decided to change form with his Shunyajiao beast. But things didn't go according to plan. The opponent must have overestimated Ye Xuan's sword skills. He didn't know anything about sword arts at all. In this case, he had already overdone his caution and felt even a little embarrassed. But who told him about it in the first place? It was just speculation. There was no guarantee that swordsmanship was Ye Xuan's strongest direction, even if he was from the swordsmanship current. He had his own methods of fighting that no one could foresee, and even discretion wouldn't help Shen Ye. But he had to admit, Shen was indeed a master of the art, able to transform into a bear and other beasts. But what did he think of the characters that Xuan had carved into his face? Everyone knew that Ye Xuan was only at the key tempering stage, but no one knew where such terrifying brute strength came from. This time, our hero decided to use the Royal Dragon Elephant technique, which was as low as level 8, and he didn't miss. Shen was completely disarmed and confused, as he wasn't prepared to resist just such blows. He didn't know how. He was forced to hit only when he had the opportunity, and it didn't come soon enough. Even with 3 Imperial Dragon Bones under the reinforcement of the Dragon Elephant technique, Ye Xuan was unable to destroy his opponent, who was at the peak of groundwork. It was obvious that finishing the fight with Shen Ye wouldn't be possible right away. He didn't expect to win quickly. He did his best. But when things didn't work, he just ran. Shen Ye immediately knew that his opponent no longer had any advantages. But running away he thought was pointless, as he could turn into a deer and run faster. It was surprising that with such wounds, Shen still had the strength to chase after Ye Xuan. Were all the members of the Myriad Swords Alliance so stubborn? Ye Xuan didn't have a specific plan. He was just running. But when he saw the 3rd level demonic beast field, it was as if it had hit him. Spring had come, and with it came the mating season for all living things. Seeing this, Ye Xuan even got embarrassed and immediately decided to stop it, which was unnatural for him. Reindeer were noble spiritual beasts of the 3rd level. In such an important endeavor as mass reproduction, they had to look for partners with decent heredity. And such a partner Ye Xuan could certainly provide. He directly ran towards them. Shen was so obsessed with catching Ye Xuan as soon as possible that he was completely unaware of what was happening and what kind of trap he had fallen into. Ye Xuan decided to arrange a small gift for him. It was clear that Shen loved beasts, so why wouldn't he enjoy it to his heart's content? Shen Ye was simply drowning in the attention of the other deer and could not get away from them. He was literally worshipped there. Satisfied that he had managed to bring the divided ones together, Zhuan thought about the fact that he should have gone about finding a spirit stone for his mirror. But while he was running, a tree fell on him. Apparently, some suckers decided to pick a fight again. But their power was impressive. Lunze and Shui Yunqi, who were from different factions, could be spotted in the sky. Ye Xuan was noticed, and he had no choice but to say hello and ask if he was disturbing them. Lunzia wondered why this brat was still alive. Apparently, he had counted on Shen Ye to kill him for sure. But as it turned out, he didn't. And because of that, anger was surging in his body more and more. He forgot about his current opponent, and immediately turned his attention to Ye Xuan, wanting to deal with him personally. Xuan had gotten into the thick of the battle, and this Gutse also decided to give too much honor in the middle of the battle to go down in pursuit of the other. Belyash could not sit still either. He jumped off his master's shoulder and went somewhere. Yi Xuan was immediately taken by surprise, aiming his sword straight at his back. He was ordered to humbly accept his death, for there would be no way for him to escape. But shouldn't Lung Tse go to hell? His demands were too great. Lun Ce didn't even have time to strike before his sword was snapped in half. Shui Yunqi was dissatisfied that Lun Ce had shifted his attention from him to the other so quickly. After all, they were opponents today. Shui Yunqi aimed to spoil Lun Ze's plans, but what would come of it? Lunze had already counted on sending both of them to the other world. Ye Xuan was extremely grateful to Brother Shui and ran away so as not to prevent them from continuing their exchange. Lun Ti could tell that Xuan was running quite fast for a scum, but he didn't want to let him go. Our hero was immediately followed by another ally, Lun Ce, as if he was waiting for him on purpose. It was definitely an ambush. Ye Xuan was simply taken by surprise, and if he hadn't managed to dodge, it was quite possible that his handsome head was already lying among those stumps. He was happy that his reaction didn't fail him, and he managed to keep himself alive. Once he managed to relax a bit, an angry and shaking Shenya appeared in front of him. After that, Xuan could appreciate the stamina this boy had. After all, he had thought that Shen would lie quietly for a few days and recover. They originally had a normal battle, but Ye Xuan had stripped his opponent of his purity. And now Shen had a personal score to settle with him. The situation was dire, for he was surrounded on all sides and everyone intended to kill him. But since there was such a thing, one could have a lot of fun and not hold back. Just as he was about to do something, he heard the rustling of bushes, his barnacle rushing toward him. The seal was pointing to the side. Apparently, he meant to say that he had taken this egg out of some sacred beast's nest, which was not a good thing. Ye Xuan immediately realized the problem, and decided to secretly transmit the information to Shui Yunqi to get him to leave this place as well. And surprisingly, Shui Yunqi immediately understood everything, and took this signal seriously. Yi Xuan and Shui Yunqi fled the battlefield together, after which they left their opponents bewildered. Just a moment later, the roar of a huge dragon could be heard. It was the beast from which the dumpling had stolen the egg. It was a demonic beast of the 5th-rank dragon boa. It had great prospects of evolving into a dragon. Judging from its appearance, it had been refining for at least 1,000 years, and its strength was equal to a peak of golden elixir. Nevertheless, its scales looked rather strange. There was only one explanation for it. It contained a natural treasure inside. Speaking of which, when this boa constrictor appeared, the imperial dragon bone in Ye Xuan's body vaguely responded. It was possible that the beast's body contained an imperial dragon bone as well. Lung Ce was either tired of running or realized something. He ordered his men to retreat, surround, and finish this thing off. Balash had stolen this beast's egg, and he was also probably able to sense the treasures under Ye Xuan as well. Therefore, he was sure that he would be the first to be taken care of by this beast. Ye Xuan immediately rushed over to encourage Lun Ce to go into battle against the dragon boa. He thought that if he separated from these guys, he would only find himself in more danger. Therefore, he decided to drag Lun Ce into this fight, so he could increase the odds and wear down his competitors at the same time. It was an excellent plan. In this way, one could get rid of 2 deadly dangers at once. The strength of the dragon boa was terrifying. One could only guess what the creature had absorbed to become so strong. Lun Ce suggested that everyone temporarily form an alliance and work together to kill this beast. His first ally was fine with it. Shui Yunqi was still interested in Ye Xuan's opinion, who of course was only in favor. Ye Xuan was at the body hardening stage, but the junior didn't understand why Shui was interested in his opinion. In fact, Shui had long noticed that despite his weakness, Xuan was able to win thanks to his skills. Therefore, he didn't rule out the possibility that he was the key link in this victory. Lun Ce didn't want to go to the front, hence sending Ye Xuan, which was quite expected. Ye Xuan in turn decided to act rather proudly, and didn't even bother to argue, and agreed. Who knew if he felt fear of this beast or not? But he looked confident enough to make Lun Ce feel weaker.